Thanks, Kirsten. Caleb and I are really, really excited to be with you today to talk about membership. We have some goals for our session today, particularly for collegiate members. We want to be able to understand the recruitment and selection process a little bit further. And then also kind of think through about how equity and inclusion practices can increase the effectiveness and the outcome of recruitment and selection. We are lucky enough to have Caleb, who is a new SC on this call. Caleb recently had a very successful year at Texas Tech University. And so Caleb is going to take the lead on some of the really innovative practices that they had. But we think that many of these practices we're going to suggest can scale to any kind of university, whether you have a very large chapter like Texas Tech or something that's more of a building chapter. So we try to aim it towards each of those. And then finally, at the end, we have a case study, some case studies of some applicants. And what we hope to do is engage you all to see what you think of the applicants and what you might consider if you're sitting at the table selecting for your next chapter, what things you might weigh a little bit more, and hopefully some of the lessons from the early part, the setup, will be helpful to you. So I'm going to get out of Caleb's way because Caleb is the recruitment and selections pro, and we'll come back with the case studies at the end. So Caleb, over to you.
Well, thank you so much. So like Patience just mentioned, my name is Caleb Hart. I am a recent graduate from Texas Tech University. I was the chapter president. Before that, I was our VP of communications. So I've kind of seen recruitment 2 years in a row and kind of what we've done from one year to the next. So I kind of want to touch on what is that recruitment and membership selection, as well as just what does overall membership look like for Mortarboard. So it kind of starts with preparing for recruitment, right? Like you've got to get people interested in Mortarboard to apply so that you can maintain membership. So some ways that we were really innovative with our campus awareness is we used a ton of different outlets in order to get the word out. So we used our original social media. Our Mortarboard Tech Instagram page would post out stuff, and we actually had incentives for our members. So this sweatshirt that I'm wearing, our members had to get 10 points in order to get their sweatshirt, but they got a t-shirt just for being a part of our chapter. So by sharing our social media, we would put out a post and we would say, hey, this is worth a point. They would actually share that, we would keep track of it, and they would get incentives for being involved on our social media. Granted, that is kind of their friends getting to know more about Mortarboard, right? Like that outreach isn't amazing because it's more of their friends seeing and acknowledging the fact that they know somebody who is in Mortarboard. We took that into account. So we also did other types of campus awareness. So we went out to different student organizations. If we had people who were in organizations, we had them go talk. We had different outreach programs where we would partner with SGA. So it was called Mortarboard Presents with SGA, and it would get our name out in partnership with a lot of different big organizations. We did one with the Hispanic Student Society. We did ones with just different groups that had large numbers in order for us to be successful there. And then just different ambassador programs within colleges. We made sure that we hit everybody and anybody that we could through student organizations in order to be successful with that. Our campus also has a really unique resource, and I bet a lot of different campuses have it too. It's called Tech Announce, where our university compiles an email every day, and I specifically get it at 11:04 a.m. every single day. And you can submit different pieces to it. So we would have Mortarboard on there at least weekly. If they're interested in Mortarboard, follow us. Here's the application link, follow our Instagram. Just anything and everything we could in order to get that awareness to everybody. We did kind of like a nomination system, but for tech, we have a little bit of a different struggle than most chapters. We have a ton of people who are interested in Mortarboard. So we do advisor outreach where we contact every academic advisor. We ask them who is somebody that they see that could be a great upcoming senior who exemplifies the scholarship, leadership, and service aspects that we are looking for, different things like that. Just trying to get anybody and everybody's input into who should that next class be. And then lastly, we use the collegiate facilities that we have available. A bunch of TVs are spread out throughout all the different academic colleges. we created posts for those, and we just emailed different people who are in charge of those TVs asking, hey, do you mind if we put this on your TV? They have like a rotating slideshow. Is that an option for us to utilize? So we pretty much asked anybody and everybody who we could, if we could showcase what Mortarboard is, who we are, and how we handle scholarship, leadership, and service. So that's some specific ways to get campus awareness programs started. But we also want to be mindful of who is not at the table. So what's a population that we're not being successful at recruiting? Who are we accidentally leaving off the table? So kind of talking about that outreach part, making sure that you're hitting different people. Not everybody's on social media. Not everybody is always on campus. They might be a commuter student. So how do you kind of navigate those different outlets to where everybody is available and at least knows about Mortarboard? And we decided the best way to tackle that is to just go with so many different outlets in our campus recruiting, as well as that tech announce, because we know that every single student gets that email. So that's one of our best ways in order to making sure that everybody understands what Mortarboard is and making sure that the applications are accessible. We also have it on our social media. We have a website to the application. We posted it everywhere we could just to make sure that we weren't accidentally missing a niche population just by us simply not going above and beyond. So we made sure that we went above and beyond with that. Something unique
Can I add to that a little bit?
Yes, for sure.
Yesterday, I had the chance to be with Region 6, so I see Randy and Eugene were there. And when Randy was leading our introductions, there was a critical mass of folks who had transferred to their institution. And they talked about how Mortarboard was a great organization as a transfer student to get involved in, because it didn't like assume previous years of involvement, but it was truly kind of a senior capstone that they could do. So I thought that that was a really interesting trend. And I don't know if other folks heard other little pockets, but I know we've been thinking a lot about reaching out to folks who are maybe more non-traditional students. Maybe they've had a career in the military before coming to the university, and how are we reaching sort of our veteran student organizations and other things like that, as well as sort of our organizations through sort of more of our multicultural lens as well.
For sure. I think just being mindful of everybody and anybody who you can reach out to is definitely the best way to go about it. Kind of going into that application process, something that we do is we have different questions. So we say, what is your like favorite of scholarship, leadership, and service, and why? And then how do you exemplify all three, which is kind of a way for somebody who is really involved in working 40 hours a week. Maybe they're non-traditional, they work a full-time job while they're still a student. They can kind of talk about how that leadership and how that service goes with their job, and then talk about the scholarship. So kind of looking at a holistic out view. And then we have an optional information, much like some med school applications do, just as a, can you explain any differences within your application? So maybe they're a little lower on the scholarship side, and in that optional information, they make it understood that they're lower on that because they do have to work 40 hours a week. So their time's put somewhere else, but they still meet that minimum GPA. So that's something that we make sure that we have a holistic view of the application, that we're not just targeting people who have 4.0s and a ton of leadership and a ton of service. We want to look at somebody who is well-rounded in all three. And then lastly, patients, if you'll talk about that nominations process, just a little bit more as to what that looks like as well.
Sure. So I would just add this from my experience when I was an advisor at the University of Vermont. We did not have a large amount of awareness of Mortarboard amongst our faculty on campus. And so we tried to launch a nomination process that would really kind of broadcast out to faculty to raise the awareness of Mortarboard. Of course, we were really careful and had sort of an equity lens on the way that we use the nominations, but it was just a way to kind of outreach to our faculty, raise awareness, and have our faculty sort of nominate their top students. For many campuses, that could be focusing on faculty who teach in the honors college. But what we did was really kind of focus through help with our dean's office on folks who were faculty members who taught in the upper level coursework so that they could nominate their top students, which really was just our secret plan to get faculty more aware of how to kind of honor students who are doing highly successful work in their classroom. So I think it was both. It wasn't the magic thing that increased our applications by 200-fold, but it really, I think, with sustained efforts, did raise awareness on our campus amongst our faculty. And I would add, because it's my heart, the student affairs folks on your campus are the folks who would be aware of scholarship or service and scholarship and leadership. And so don't miss those. Our secret plan was to focus on faculty.
Perfect, thank you. If you'll go to that next slide for me. Perfect, so preparing for selection, kind of how can you make sure that the members who are currently outgoing don't feel like they're just completely getting replaced? And how can you make sure that we're really prepared for that next group? So for tech, we would start recruitment in about October. So it's pretty much, you get in, perfect, you know what mortarboard is, let's begin recruiting for the next class. And you wanted to make sure that they didn't feel like all they were doing was finding their replacement, and that they really got into what mortarboard is and kind of how to prepare them for that. So first off, we started by doing a confidentiality agreement. We sent this agreement to all of our friends who are going through our membership selection process on our end. For different reasons, some people might not have been able to go to that, but everybody who was attending that got sent a confidentiality agreement. We had almost 300 applications, so we had to do it a little bit of a non-traditional route. We at first had an online selection, so we anonymized all the applications and sent them via email, and we expected our members to look through their applications that they were assigned and kind of help us with that. But we also expected them not to forward this to anybody, make sure they're not sharing any information. So we did enact a confidentiality agreement. It was a simple write-up, pretty much just saying, I, ABC, they would type in their name, understand that I will not be forwarding this, will not be sharing this information, anything like that, just due to basic like niceness of confidentiality, making sure that they're not sharing anybody's information. And it pretty much said at the end that if they broke this confidentiality agreement, they had the chance of not getting their regalia. So tech is fortunate enough that we have a good fundraising budget. So if everybody completes all requirements, we actually give our members our mortarboard regalia. So that was kind of our, if you do this, unfortunately, you would just have to pay for your own. By no means is it the end of the world, but nobody broke it. It's a good enough scare for people to stay. And then kind of talking about training for our chapter, going into that application process, we started talking about that before we launched applications. We showed everybody, here's what this application looks like, because more than likely my inbox will not be getting an email into what it looks like, but their friends or people who they know are going to be asking and answering questions. So we made sure that everybody understood what that process was. And then we did kind of some case studies and weighing factors, which we're going to go over a little bit later, making sure that we understand what those case studies look like. They're a great opportunity for people to really know and kind of evaluate that holistic scholarship, leadership, and service. And then lastly, something that we've enacted for 2 years in a row is this anti-bias training, where it's kind of a funny way that the anti-bias training goes about is some leaders will come up and they're like, how many people like cereal? Almost everybody raises their hand. And it's like, do you pour your milk in first or do you pour your cereal in first? And that question immediately gets people to having some biases. And then they'll kind of go into it a little bit more as to how bias can really impact our membership. And it can make it to where we're not holistic of everybody who exemplifies scholarship, leadership, and service on campus, but instead we're going to just those who are in Greek life or just those who are in research. So we make sure that we kind of go into it with no bias in the front of our mind, and that we're really looking at people for who they are and what they can bring to the table. And making sure that every viewpoint is factored in with that. As far as non-traditional students, that's a big population for most universities. So making sure that they have a seat at the table in mortarboard, because they are sometimes those who exemplify more leadership and more service because they had that non-traditional. And obviously they have a big reason for scholarship because they came back. They decided to still pursue education. So scholarship is at the forefront of their mind. And then the last thing with selection, just making sure that minimum selection target and your size exemption. So if you are a chapter who is looking that you might need a size exemption, by all means, please look into the National Council and kind of get their help with how to fill out that size exemption form. And then that minimum selection target, just making sure that you have as much outreach as possible. Obviously, for some universities, it is a little harder to gain momentum into joining mortarboard. So just kind of trying to do as much outreach as you can to where you're able to be selective in that minimum selection target and not leaving out any quality candidates if you do need to fill out that size exemption. Patience, do you have anything to add onto that last bullet point from the council national perspective?
Well, no, Michaela, but actually I want to talk about it from your perspective. You had an amazing, and I know we've had a few chapters here or there who have had absolutely amazing applicants. And we do have sort of a ceiling of how large we have the chapters based on your enrollment. But we don't, sometimes it is possible to ask for an exemption so that you can have more in your chapter, and we will help you think through how you keep that an engaged process. But you might have great candidates that you don't want to turn away, and that there is not like a clear line of, it would be a little bit arbitrary to cut it off at like this one point. And so for some chapters, it's getting up to that minimum selection target. I know many years at Vermont, we were really pushing to get there. And in other chapters, there's just like a boom of applicants, and we don't want to be too linear in that being like these are suggested things, but we can work with you if you need to go above it. It was kind of our topic. You can still be selective and do that.
For sure. Okay, so now we kind of want to go into what is scholarship, leadership, and service. This is going to be a little bit more of an interactive part of our presentation. So kind of your personal definition, what are you looking for as far as scholarship, leadership, and service? Feel free to drop it in the chat. Kind of looking at candidates who have all three, and we'll go into a case study with this a little later. Personally, for me, scholarship doesn't mean having a 4.0. I was never the 4.0 student, I'll be completely honest, but that allowed me to be a little bit more inclusive in my leadership and service, and making sure that I was able to do a ton of service and leadership to the institution, even if my scholarship was a little lower. But kind of looking at that holistic view, if y'all would like to drop in what those three words mean for you, and kind of this is the best way, in my opinion, for a chapter to kind of look at, whenever we look at something, what are we actually looking at? I love the idea, and I've worked with my students many times, of like, you don't want to build the cookie cutter person, because you can't have a ton of McCaleb's at your institution, right? That's going to be a rather boring institution if everybody's alike. So kind of looking at, what does that framework look like? I'll give y'all just a second to type it in the chat.
Alexander, I like how you turn scholarship into more of qualities of grit and growth. And I really like that framing of being able to read an application for that.
Yeah, that one personally resonates to me, because like, I feel like it's more important that obviously someone can get straight A's or do, like, let's say, the perfect they could in a class. But if someone has, like myself, I did get a D in a class before, but it's about how you grow from that and what you do that shows, in my opinion, like what scholarship is all about.
Absolutely. Michaela, you had the example of what scholarship looks like across different disciplines. So if there are some folks, scholarship really looks like not only performance in the classroom, but research. And for other fields, it could be scholarship in the classroom and internships or other experiential parts. So it really, there's a breadth of it that we need to consider.
For sure. For example, I was a sport management major. We did not have any sort of research. We did, but it was a lot more for your master's candidates. And as far as my scholarship, it was, how can I learn from these internships? So what can I learn here at a hands-on base instead of more of a research base? So that's something that I would always encourage people to list under scholarship, is anything that provides you a learning opportunity, in my eyes, qualifies as scholarship, because you're willing and going out of your way to learn something. It doesn't always have to be the traditional education route. A lot of our students actually put down scholarships that they have received if they are from an academic area, and just kind of showing that, hey, I've tried, I went and did as much as I could. So that's kind of something that we also take into consideration.
Okay, Michaela, I see we have the 5-minute warning. Should we jump into some case studies?
Yes, let's do that.
All right, we have 3 case studies. We'll do as many as we can get to. I'd like to dedicate the first one to Craig for obvious reasons. He's the biggest Swiftie I know. But there's a student who just happens to be named Taylor Swift. She's a rising senior who has been very involved on campus. Taylor has been involved in 13 clubs and organizations. She double majored in business and vocal performance. Taylor has a 3.0, but her involvement looked like she's been sort of an alternative spring break captain, a sorority recruitment chair, and the general body members of 11 other organizations. So if you think about this through the lens of scholarship, leadership, and service, and let's use the chat for this, or somebody can raise their hand, what are some considerations that you would have as you're considering Taylor? Craig, I'll be interested in your thoughts on this one. Alexander, did you want to add in?
Sure. Okay, you can hear me, right? One of my microphones might have just broke.
You're good.
Okay. Well, for me, obviously, in the past, I would have been like, oh, 3.0 GPA is pretty good, but, obviously there's someone higher and there's always someone lower. However, to me, that's really not important. To me, it's just about how the student is spending their time and what they're really doing on campus. 13 clubs and organizations, double major in business, that is not easy. And that is rigorous in itself, but the involvement that this student really has shown on campus, I think greatly is an example of service. Obviously, not all those clubs can be, just some things like interests, but also most likely some of those clubs are service clubs, like volunteer clubs, things like that. And even then, it takes a lot to run a club. I've been a part of clubs like gaming club, and that's a lot. But to me, this student is, very, I think, involved. And even though like they may not have the 4.0 GPA, that to me is not important in this case.
Kara, what do you see?
My concern, I guess, would be, I see the 13 clubs from a different perspective, in that she's already heavily involved. How much time is Taylor going to have to actually be an active member in mortarboard? Or is she just going to add this on to the activities that she's already in and not really participate? Which maybe, then is she taking the spot away from somebody who would be a more active member?
Those are certainly things that jumped out to McCaleb and I think certainly McCaleb suggested that she would maybe read the essays a little closer in this case to see what she can glean from that to understand. Okay, we have 2 more minutes. I just want to get to one more. McCaleb, do you want to do this or you want me to?
I've got it. Okay, so Tyler is a midfielder for the school soccer team. Tyler has been the team captain and led the team for 3 consecutive Final Fours. Tyler's GPA is a 3.2, and the involvement includes a student athlete advisory board, Athletes for Hope, and captain of the men's soccer team. What are our thoughts on our friend Tyler?
I know we were getting close on time. I think we wanted to, and I'll just like skip to the bottom of it because I don't want to put the next session behind, but we were hoping to show two students, one who's broadly involved and one who's narrowly involved, and how you consider scholarship, leadership, and service through more narrow lens, and one is there. You know, Caleb and I were talking that sometimes student athletes, there's so much time on their hands, they really do kind of focus on their athletics. But we really need to read and adjust to those standards of what they were able to contribute. Tyler's a captain, looks like he's volunteered in Athletes for Hope. Maybe those would be factors that, as maybe not broader as other candidates would be, there's a lot of great leadership that's coming through here as well. So that was kind of the conversation we hope to have. But thank you all for coming to our session. I don't want to make us late for our next session, so I think we'll close it out here. And McCaleb is one of our great SCs. I see many SCs on this call. If you are having trouble with recruitment or selection, I hope you'll be in touch with your SC to ask some questions about that. So Kirsten, back to you.